शायरी का जिक्र आते ही जो नाम हमारे जहन पर गालिब आता है वो है मिर्ज़ा असदुल्ला खां गालिब। उर्दू के सबसे ज़्यादा मशहूर और सबसे ज़्यादा पढ़े जाने वाले मिर्ज़ा गालिब की शोहरत सिर्फ उर्दू और बरे सग़ीर तक महदूद नहीं है, बल्कि उनके चाहने वाले और उनके अशार से फैज़ उठाने वाले पूरी दुनिया में मौजूद हैं। इस वक्त आलम यह है कि उर्दू ज़बान की खुशबू पूरी दुनिया में फैलती जा रही है और एक ज़माना उसकी ज़ुल्फ़ों का असीर है। आज के इस सेशन में हमारे साथ होंगी डॉक्टर अज़रा रज़ा, गालिब के अशार और डॉक्टर अज़रा रज़ा की तफ़हीम। डॉक्टर अज़रा रज़ा ने एक उम्र इसी दश्त की सयाही में बसर की। डॉक्टर साहिबा अरसे दराज से अमेरिका में मुकीम हैं और उर्दू तहज़ीब और उर्दू शायरी की मरीज़ हैं। हरफ़ों और लफ्ज़ों में उनका इश्क जुनून की हद तक पहुँच चुका है। ख़ास तौर पर गालिब के अशार की तशरीह वो इस अंदाज से करती हैं कि अशार से पर्दा उठता चला जाता है और परत खुलती चली जाती है। अंदाज़ ऐसा कि वो कहें और सुना करे कोई। तो आइए हम डॉक्टर अज़रा रज़ा के हुजूर चलते हैं गालिब का जिक्र सुनने के लिए।
Adab. Ghalib would be thoroughly amused but not surprised at all to see his work being discussed by an oncologist in English from a stage in London. He would not be surprised because he was perfectly aware of his universal appeal and the timeless nature of his work. He used noble language to convey grand themes that remain startlingly fresh for all time. This immutability, it is this enduring charm that invites so many over the last 150 years to look at the poet through radically different angles again and again and again. My co-author, Sarah Suleri-Goodyear, for the book Ghalib, Epistemologies of Elegance, and I are not Ghalib scholars by any stretch of the imagination. Rather, we are readers. Readers who are unabashedly self-serving in that we have untrammeled admiration for his magnificent body of work, the language that he was a master of, and most importantly, that intricate, courtly, courtesy culture that produced the language. In a way, it is liberating to examine the work from the point of view of a common reader rather than a scholar. Because instead of diving in to find some esoteric meanings, my interest now is focused on understanding Ghalib's advice about how to conduct our daily lives, how to really manage our affairs from day to day, how to arm ourselves to face the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, how to bear the whips and scorns of time. And Ghalib never disappoints. He offers tremendous insights. I have yet to meet a problem in my life that he has not addressed in the space of 1802 shades in his famous Diwan, either directly or indirectly. And much of it coming from when he was between 17 and 24 years of age. So the title of my talk is The Many-Minded Ghalib. My reading is going to be a hybrid one, combining the purely aesthetic experience with a more pragmatic, practical, everyday experience. For one thing, Ghalib serves as a guiding light during some of my darkest professional moments. I'm an oncologist, treating patients with a particularly deadly form of bone marrow cancer. I walk countless individuals to their deaths, escorting them through some of the most harrowing, painful terminal illnesses. There's a point reached, rather invariably in these types of cancers, where no further treatment can be offered. This stage is particularly distressing to handle for the younger oncologists. They feel defeated, lost, bereft, almost paralyzed in the face of such mortality. Spurned by the vigor of youth, some fight back, denying the inevitable. Well, training young doctors is very much part of my daily responsibilities as a teacher at Columbia University. I counsel them to accept the truth, and instead of feeling crushed, I advise them to focus upon how to make the final journey less painful for their patients, how to bring a modicum of relief to their shattered spirits, why they must shift their attention from trying to cure to trying to heal. Ghalib taught me how to make this possible. He points out in 1,000 nuanced ways how compassion and empathy are just as important for the ill, the suffering, the afflicted, as the drugs we administer to them. This one share, for example, is so profound. It is so poignant, so uplifting. I recite it often to my American medical students, residents, and fellows in training with me. तौफीक ब अंदाज़े हिम्मत है अज़ल से, तौफीक ब अंदाज़े हिम्मत है अज़ल से, आंखों में है वो कतरा जो गौहर न हुआ था. From infinity, accomplishment rests on endurance. Rain's triumph lies in becoming a tear and not a pearl. You see, the myth in Urdu poetry is that only the first few raindrops from the season's first rain have a chance of becoming a pearl if they land inside a clam. In this sher, Ghalib is providing consolation to raindrops that missed being the first of the season, and therefore they have no chance of becoming a pearl. He reminds them that yes, they cannot become a pearl, but now they have the possibility of becoming a tear that comes out of the eye of a lover. Ghalib elevates the energy of endurance until endurance itself becomes a humane and a dynamic force. Ultimately, the only consolation is that there is no consolation. This is the remarkable inversion of the reality principle, meaning that normally it is hope that gives subject to action. What Ghalib says is that when there is no hope, something else has to define our actions. Once hope is discarded, hopelessness itself becomes a form of action. If you say there is no ummeed, there is no hope left, then you cannot look far ahead. Rather, you are forced to pay attention to the here and now, to go on living from day to day. Instead of vying for pearls, you start to feel the anguish of life through tears. I remind the young doctors not to become overly obsessed with finding a cure at this stage. Because finding none to offer, they tend to become dejected to the point of abandoning their patients, feeling they have nothing left to offer them. Well, in fact, this is where a doctor's real challenge begins. The cure part is easy, the science being represented by a pearl. Healing is the more difficult one, the tears part. आंखों में है वो कतरा जो गौहर ना हुआ था, the one that didn't become a pearl. This one requires ultimate humility. This share through the pearl tear analogy reinforces the idea that in addition to the science of medicine, there is a real art to medicine as well. That warmth and sympathy and understanding can often outweigh a surgeon's knife or a chemist's drug. Emily Dickinson, the great revolutionary American poet, says something similar. Surgeons must be very careful when they test the knife. Surgeons must be very careful when they test the knife, for underneath their fine incision rests the culprit, life. In another gorgeous ghazal, Ghalib points out that even for a prophet, it is easier to cure than to heal. What a subtle difference he makes. Ibn Maryam hua kare koi, अरे मेरे दुख की दवा करे कोई. Mary's son may have performed miracles. Who bears the salve for my suffering? This share invokes a Christ who cannot help ease the poet's suffering. Here, both prophecy and poetry must dissipate when faced with the realities of existence. There are no saviors on the scene other than the poet's language, which is itself highly conscious of its own fragility. This sense of frailty is made even more hypnotic by the fact that Christ, a highly revered prophet in the Islamic tradition, is referred to as Mary's son, Ibn Maryam. The vulnerability implied here suggests that both the poet and the prophet are in need of a healing that is being withheld from them. Mortality is all. Here's another sher that conveys a host of varied meanings to the individual reader. काविश का दिल करे है तकाजा के है हनूज. काविश का दिल करे है तकाजा के है हनूज. नाखुन पे कर्ज उस गिरहे नीम बाज का. The heart demands greater exertion, for yet our fingernails owe a debt to the half undone knots. Beautiful. One reading of this sher is a romantic one. Dr. Farman Fatehpuri interprets the half undone knot to be cardiac in nature. The heart is protesting the torment of being left only partially unknotted. Consummation is sought by reminding the nails that they owe a debt to undo the knot completely. वो खलिश कहाँ से होती जो जिगर के पार होता. But in another reading, which seems compatible with an oft-repeated Ghalib refrain, there's a more universal message about what constitutes a meaning life here. The kavish, or the exertion, refers to one's obsession with arriving at solutions, comprehensions of existential complexities. In this reading, Ghalib reminds the reader that the work is not done as long as there is a single puzzle left only half solved in the entire universe. Or the kavish is a self-perpetuating phenomenon that must continue until one's last breath. This is the same theme as in Araye-she Jamal se farig nahi hanoz. आराइशे जमाल से फारिग नहीं हनूज, पेशे नजर है आईना दायम नकाब में. So beautiful. The embellishment of the ravishing is never to be done. Araish-e Jamal se farig nahi hanoz. The embellishment of the ravishing is never to be done. Inside the seclusion of the veil, the mirror lives constantly. The construction of enchantment, whether ethereal or earthly, requires infinite art and labor, one that can never see an end in sight. In some ways, this sher demands to be read simultaneously as both a statement of metaphysical and of corporeal desire, in which the impulse appears to be the enigma of incompletion. The deity adorns his creation, but remains hidden from the creator, never revealing his final word, while the artifice of the human other is again always in its waiting for the point of fulfillment. Neither the created nor the creator can expect the calm of consummation. Both are en route on a journey into irresolution. Here's another one of Ghalib's magnificent commentaries on the complex workings of the existential angst of humanity. बे मैं किसे है ताकते आशोबे आगही. बे मैं किसे है ताकते आगोश आशोबे आगही, खींचा है अज्ज़े हौसला ने खत अयाग का. Who can bear the anguish of awareness without wine? Our capacity, in fact, is what draws the line on the cup. बे मैं किसे है ताकते आशोबे आगही. Who can bear the anguish of awareness without wine? How beautiful is that? Ayah here refers to the cup of wine. Khecha hai ajze hausle ne khat ayah ka. Khat, of course, line. Ayah is the cup of wine. We need some form of intoxication, bekhudi, some jurate rindana, to face the turmoil and the chaos of life. Yet, we hold back on imbibing. We set limits by drawing lines on the cup of wine because we are too weak to engage with abandon. Some interpret this by blaming the saqi instead, who is miserly and measures out the wine that he's giving in small doses. Now, these lines on the wine cup, of course, take us to the apocryphal story of Jamshed, the fourth king in Firdausi's Shahnama. Jamshed is associated with discovery of wine. Legend has it that the king had banished a woman from his harem, and she became so despondent that she tried to commit suicide by drinking from a jar labeled with poison. In reality, it contained fermented spoiled grapes that were deemed undrinkable. After she swallows the so-called poison, instead of dying, the girl found her spirit soaring. She got so excited, she promptly took this intoxicating discovery to the king. And Jamshed not only accepted her back in his harem, in fact, he decreed that from that day onwards, all the grapes grown in Persia would be devoted to winemaking. Now, Jamshed possessed a special cup, Jam-e Jamshed. It was said to be filled with an elixir of immortality. And all 7 heavens of the universe could be observed by simply looking into the cup. The whole world was said to be reflected in it, and the cup could reveal the deeper truths. Azra Raza. It is often depicted, in fact, as a crystal ball. The beauty of Urdu ghazal, with its symbolic language, is on full display here. So much is implied without ever actually mentioning anything by name. Simply by saying Khat Ayagh Ka, the entire story of Jamshed and Jam-e Jamshed are implied. Such techniques, when employed by the genius of Ghalib, add layers of complexities, leaving room for several possible interpretations, literally reaching beyond words. Coming back to the sher in question, Khecha hai ajze hausle ne khat ayab ka. I want to point out how Ghalib's poetry depicts an aching eroticism that veers between addressing an earthly versus a divine beloved with remarkable impunity. In the end, his essential message remains one of deep compassion. And yes, rather similar to Dante's in the Divine Comedy, that it is love that makes the universe go round. Ghalib adds to Dante by saying that there's only one real way to drink from the cup of love, with abandon. And of course, the conceit here is that Ghalib possesses that abandon. Since in another ghazal, the wine bearer is heard lamenting his absence in these words. कौन होता है हरीफे मैं मर्दफ़्कन इश्क. Such a beautiful ghazal. कौन होता है हरीफे मैं मर्दफ़्कन इश्क है मुकर्रर लबे साक़ी पे सला मेरे बाद बारे आराम से हैं अहले जफा मेरे बाद. Who remains a challenger for the fatal intoxicant of love? The wine bearer repeats that invitation to imbibe in my aftermath, mere baad. You know, people have expressed their appreciation of Ghalib in many wonderful ways over the last 1.5 centuries. I want to end with one deeply moving manifestation of profound love for the poet. In 1983, I was in Delhi with my mother, visiting her best friend, the great Urdu writer Saliha Abid Hussain. One evening, Ms. Dakhala Jan, as we called her, was invited to preside over a book opening ceremony at Ghalib Academy in Nizamuddin. She took us along with her. The writer who came on stage to introduce his book was a marvelous older gentleman, so frail that he appeared skeletal. He clearly did not belong to the privileged class occupying the front rows of the hall. He had a deeply lined face. He was wearing a black suit that had been ironed so many times that it had developed a silver shine. As soon as he started to speak, he completely ravished me. With extraordinary decorum, extreme courtesy and gentleness, he spoke in a very soft voice. Ladies and gentlemen, I have experienced two great passions in my life. Ghalib and Imam Hussain. I decided to combine the love of both in this new book. So I have written a tribute to Imam Hussain in the zameen of every ghazal from Diwan-e Ghalib. आह को चाहिए कुम्र असर होने तक, नौहा I have written in this zameen. मुद्दत हुई है यार को मेहमा किए हुए, I have written a soz in this meter. वो फिराक और वो विसाल कहाँ, I have written a salam in this beher. This is the inimitable uniqueness of Ghalib. No other poet, no other writer in Urdu has ruled over our hearts and our minds with such absolute control. Ghalib challenges our intellect, but he also grips our hearts. We can read him and think and think and think about all the possible interpretations, or we can simply fall in love with him. Is it because of a word, a misra, a sher, a ghazal, a clever, witty anecdote about him, or a hilarious letter that he wrote? I don't know. Or is it just an instant connection of hearts that defies all definitions and explanations? अरे आसिद नहीं ये काम तेरा अपनी राह ले, उसका पयाम दिल के सिवा कौन ला सके, अर्जो समा कहाँ तेरी वुसअत को पा सके, मेरा ही दिल है वो के जहां तू समा सके. So with all my heart I say Ghalib Zindabad, Rekhta Zindabad. Thank you.